At 07:42 hours on March the 4th, 1944, over snow-streaked skies above Brandenburg, a silver formation broke through the haze. Vapor trails sliced the dawn apart. Captain Robert Hawk Jenkins pushed the throttle forward, the Packard Merlin V1650-3 roaring at 61 inches of manifold pressure. The gauges trembled. Hot glycol smell filled the cockpit. Below, 55 P-51B Mustangs escorted 238 B-17 flying fortresses toward Berlin, 675 miles from their English bases. German intelligence documents from January 1944 had assessed Allied single-engine escort range at 475 miles maximum. The Luftwaffe's defensive ring sat at 500 miles, positioned where enemy fighters should turn back. But Jenkins' Mustang wasn't turning back. Twin 108-gallon drop tanks gleamed beneath the wings, paper and glue carrying fuel deeper than aluminum ever could. By the time Rechlin's engineers understood what that engine truly carried, it was already above the Reichstag. The joke about American thirst was about to age poorly. In August 1942, the North American aviation plant in Inglewood, California, shimmered under desert heat. Edgar Schmued, the German-born chief engineer, stood over drawings spread across a metal work table. The P-51 Mustang prototype had flown beautifully at low altitude, but reports from RAF squadrons told a different story. Above 15,000 feet, the Allison V1710 engine lost power. At 25,000 feet, it choked. British pilots filed complaint after complaint. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, 8th Air Force bomber crews died in formation. On August 17, 1942, the Schweinfurt-Regensburg mission lost 60 B-17s. No fighter could escort them deep into Germany. The P-51's range was impressive, nearly 400 miles with internal fuel, but its high-altitude performance was catastrophic. Schmued traced the cowling line with his pencil. "We need another heart," he said quietly. His assistant, Don Berlin, looked up. "British?" Schmued nodded. "The Merlin breathes thin air." The telegram to Rolls-Royce went out that week. What arrived 6 months later would terrify the Luftwaffe. Quietly, under California sun and British rain. In October 1942, Stanley Hooker studied the Mustang airframe shipped to Rolls-Royce's Hucknall facility near Derby. The fuselage was elegant, narrow, aerodynamically clean. The problem was immediately obvious. "The Merlin won't fit," Hooker said. The Rolls-Royce Merlin 61, with its two-stage supercharger, was bulkier than the Allison. The cowling would need complete redesign. Cooling ducts had to route differently. The carburetor intake required repositioning. Hooker's team worked through October and November, modifying the airframe drawings. By December, the first hybrid prototype sat on the tarmac. When test pilot Ronald Harker fired up the engine on October 13, 1942, the Merlin's deeper roar shook the hangar walls. Harker climbed to 20,000 feet in minutes. His radio call was brief. "Climbs like hell, handles like a Spitfire with American legs." Performance data logged that day showed the Merlin Mustang reached 440 ml at 29,800 feet. The Allison-powered version managed 390 medium at 15,000 feet before losing power. Hooker filed his report to the Air Ministry. "This aircraft will change escort doctrine." By January 1943, Packard Motor Company began licensing Merlin production in Detroit. The hybrid would soon cross the Atlantic in numbers. In January 1943, inside a heated briefing room at Rechlin Luftwaffe Test Center, Colonel Werner von Ohain reviewed intelligence photographs. The new Allied fighter, designated Mustang, appeared in reconnaissance images over France. Von Ohain tapped the performance estimates. Range, 475 miles with internal fuel, insufficient for deep penetration escort. Laughter rippled through the room. German analysts focused on published specifications from captured manuals. A Focke-Wulf engineer pointed at fuel consumption charts. At combat power, the Merlin burns 90 gallons per hour. Internal capacity, 184 gallons. Basic mathematics. The Luftwaffe's defensive strategy relied on this calculation. Position fighter forces 500 miles inland, beyond escort range. Attack bombers, when they're alone. Von Ohain signed off on the defensive deployment plan without revision. What German intelligence missed was hidden in North American aviation's experimental reports. With twin 75-gallon drop tanks and optimized fuel mixture settings, the P-51B's range exceeded 300 miles. At 25,000 feet, running lean mixture past the channel, the Merlin sipped fuel like a transport. The paper drop tanks, laminated cardboard and adhesive, weighed 30 pounds empty versus 65 pounds for aluminum. Every pound saved became miles added. That January, the Germans calculated escort limitations. By February, the 354th Fighter Group was preparing missions their enemies believed impossible. The mathematics would soon fail. On March 15, 1943, at RAF Bottisham in Cambridgeshire, Captain Robert Jenkins brushed frost from the P-51B's canopy. The aircraft smelled of hydraulic fluid and fresh paint. Ground crew had worked through the night installing the experimental paper drop tanks. Chief Warrant Officer Paul Delano tapped the left tank. Impregnated paper, 4 plies, resin-coated, they'll hold 108 gallons each. Jenkins raised an eyebrow. Paper? Delano grinned. Paper that flies to Berlin. The Packard Merlin, F-1653, coughed once, then caught, the 4-blade propeller biting cold air. Jenkins advanced the throttle. The takeoff roll felt heavier with external tanks, but rotation came clean at 90 mph peak. He climbed to 25,000 feet, watching fuel flow. Oil pressure held at 70 psi. Coolant temperature sat at 105 degrees Celsius. The Merlin didn't labor or cough. It sang. At altitude, Jenkins switched to the first drop tank. Fuel flowed smoothly. He toggled back to internal, then external again. Seamless. His radio call at 09:21 hours. Control Red One. She climbs better than a spit. Fuel feed confirmed. Over. The control tower logged the test flight. 2 hours, 40 minutes airborne. Fuel remaining, 62 gallons internal. The drop tanks had extended range by 320 miles. Jenkins landed, canopy open, grinning. Delano met him on the tarmac. Now we teach the others. Training began the next morning. The sky had tilted. By October 1943, the 354th Fighter Group at Boxted Airfield flew endurance training daily. Pilots called them long-haul missions, simulated escort runs to Denmark and back, 8 hours in the cockpit. The cold was relentless. At 25,000 feet, outside air temperature dropped to -40 Celsius. Cockpit heaters struggled. Jenkins' logbook from October 18th recorded 7.5 hours airborne, hands numb, back cramped, oxygen mask froze to face. Delano's engineering team refined fuel management procedures. Run rich mixture on climb to 10,000 feet, he briefed the squadron. Lean out past 20,000. Monitor exhaust gas temperature. Stay below 850 degrees. Toggle between tanks every 30 minutes to balance weight. The pilots memorized the checklist. Every ounce of fuel translated to miles. Every mile meant bombers protected. By late October, the 354th routinely flew 6-hour missions. Fuel remaining on landing averaged 45 gallons, 15 minutes of reserve. It was enough. Meanwhile, Luftwaffe radar operators reported anomalies. Allied formations appeared deeper inland. Hanover, Kassel, even Magdeburg. Intelligence reports questioned the data. Impossible. No single-engine fighter has that range. But the radar didn't lie. By November, German defensive doctrine began shifting. Fighter reserves moved 100 miles further east. The Allies noticed. Bomber losses over Western Germany dropped by 18% in November 1943 compared to October. Every training sortie at Boxted stretched the envelope. Every frozen hand and cramped back was invisible progress, measured in endurance, frostbite, and lives saved over targets the enemy thought unreachable. At 8th Air Force Headquarters in High Wycombe, November 1943, General James Doolittle studied mission maps. Red threads stretched deeper into Germany each week. Bremen, Hanover, Hamburg. "We're getting close," he said. But bomber crews reported a pattern. Mustangs turned back before targets, and German fighters waited just beyond escort range. Doolittle called for an engineering review. "Extend range another 100 miles, whatever it takes." Delano's team at Boxted modified fuel systems. They connected drop tank feed lines directly to the engine, bypassing internal tanks initially. The risk was catastrophic. Overpressure could rupture fuel lines, igniting the entire system. They tested it anyway. On November 22, 1943, Jenkins flew the modified P-51B. At 18,000 feet over the North Sea, the left drop tank feed line burst. Fuel sprayed across the wing route. He shut down the flow, jettisoned the tank, and limped back on internal fuel. He landed at Boxted with 7 gallons remaining. Ground crew found scorch marks on the wing. Jenkins climbed out, coughing smoke. She held together. "Adjust the pressure relief valve." Delano's team recalibrated the system. By December, the P-51B carried 184 gallons internal, plus 216 gallons external, 400 gallons total. At optimized cruise, that meant 1,300 miles range. Doolittle's map now showed a new target within reach. Berlin, 650 miles from English bases. The red thread stretched all the way to the Reichstag. On December 15, 1943, 8th Air Force issued Field Order 357. Prepare for extended range escort operations. Target, German capital. The line had been crossed on paper. Soon it would be crossed in the sky. In December 1943, at Luftwaffe Command in Berlin, Oberst Adolf Galland reviewed loss reports. Messerschmitt Bf 109 and Focke-Wulf FW 190 attrition rates had climbed. 34 fighters lost in November, 52 in December. Galland studied reconnaissance photos. Silver-tailed single-engine fighters appeared in gun camera footage from Magdeburg, 325 miles inland. His adjutant frowned. "Impossible, Herr Oberst. American escort range is assessed at 475 miles round trip." Galland tapped the photo. "Then our assessments are wrong." A memo dated December 22, 1943, from Luftwaffe Reich Intelligence read, "Enemy fighter, type P-51, sighted over central Germany. Range inconsistent with known specifications. Request immediate investigation." At Rechlin, engineers re-examined captured reports. Klaus Ritter, a quiet fuel analyst, circled something in a reconnaissance photo. Cylindrical tanks beneath Mustang wings. External fuel, but not aluminum. He compared weight estimates. Too light? Perhaps paper? Von Ohain looked at him sharply. "Paper?" Ritter nodded. "Laminated, resin-treated. The Americans are flying on reinforced cardboard." The room went silent. Von Ohain recalculated. If the tanks held 100 gallons each, and the Mustang's internal capacity was 180 gallons, total fuel reached 380 gallons. At cruise consumption of 40 gallons per hour, that meant 9.5 hours endurance. At 180 men-ph cruise, that was 1,700 miles range. The number seemed absurd, but the math didn't lie. Ritter wrote in his report, "If projections are accurate, no target in the Reich is beyond escort range." Von Ohain forwarded the report to Berlin. Galland read it on December 28th. His response, recorded in Luftwaffe archives, Revise defensive deployment immediately. American fighters can now reach anywhere. We can run. On February 20th, 1944, the first day of Big Week, Jenkins' P-51B shook from slipstream at 26,000 feet. He flew wing to wing with B-17s from the 91st Bomb Group, contrails streaming white against blue sky. Below, flak bursts tore black holes in the air. The formation crossed the Rhine at 10:34 hours. German radar lit up. "Red flight, bandits 12 o'clock high," Jenkins called. Messerschmitt Bf-109s dove from 30,000 feet, cannon fire sparkling on their noses. Jenkins rolled left, the Merlin screaming. Tracers sliced past his canopy. He pulled into a climbing turn, G-forces pressing him into the seat. The Messerschmitt followed, but the Merlin's power advantage showed. Jenkins gained altitude, flipped inverted, and dove. He fired a 2-second burst. The Bf-109's wing shredded, and it tumbled, trailing smoke. Over the radio. P-51's over Hanover. Repeat, Mustangs over target. The bombers struck Brunswick's rail yards at 11:50 hours. Jenkins' fuel gauge showed 140 gallons remaining. He stayed with the bombers. The return flight was long and cold. They crossed the English coast at 15:42 hours. Jenkins landed at Boxted with 28 gallons left, 8 minutes of fuel. Delano met him on the tarmac. "How far?" Jenkins pulled off his oxygen mask. "All the way." That day, February 20th, 1944, marked the first time P-51 Mustangs escorted heavy bombers deep into Germany and back. 8th Air Force recorded 21 German fighters destroyed for 3 P-51s lost. The air war's mathematics had shifted. Gallen's words, recorded later in interrogation. "The day we saw Mustangs over Germany's interior, we knew the war had changed. They could reach anywhere." On March 4th, 1944, at 06:15 hours, 238 B-17 flying Fortresses lifted from English airfields. Above them, 55 P-51B Mustangs from the 4th and 354th Fighter Groups climbed in formation. Mission number 241, Berlin. Jenkins adjusted his oxygen mask and checked fuel. Internal tanks, 184 gallons. Drop tanks, 216 gallons. Total, 400 gallons. Enough for 1,300 miles if everything went perfectly. The formation crossed the Dutch coast at 08:20 hours. Jenkins engaged drop tank feed at 12,000 feet. Fuel flowed smoothly. At 10:45 hours, they crossed the Elbe River. German controllers scrambled every available fighter, Bf-109s, FW-190s, even Bf-110 night fighters pressed into daylight service. The sky over Brandenburg erupted at 11:30 hours. Contrails tangled like threads. Sunlight flashed off wings. Jenkins fired at a Focke-Wulf, tracers stitching across its fuselage. It rolled away, smoking. His wingman called, "Sir, look down." Below, through broken clouds, the city sprawled. Berlin's streets, the Spree River, smoke from industrial districts. The B-17s released their bombs at 11:52 hours. For the first time in history, the Reich's capital was under escorted American bombing attack. Jenkins jettisoned his empty drop tanks and turned west. The return flight stretched endlessly. His fuel gauge dropped steadily. 120 gallons, 90 gallons, 60 gallons. Over the North Sea, the needle touched 35 gallons. The white cliffs of Dover appeared at 15:40 hours. He landed at Debden with 14 gallons remaining. Ground crew ran to the aircraft. Delano checked the tanks and whispered, "She made it, all the way." The logbook entry that night was simple. Mission 241, Berlin, escort successful, range confirmed, 1,281 miles. The P-51 Mustang had just rewritten strategic bombing doctrine. The unthinkable had become operational reality. At Rechlin Test Center on March 5, 1944, the same engineers who had mocked the Mustang's limitations now studied reconnaissance photos in silence. Berlin's skyline showed fresh bomb damage. Tempelhof district, Siemensstadt factories, the Reichsbahn yards, smoke plumes twisted across the horizon. Ritter placed fuel analysis charts on the conference table. Confirmed range with drop tanks, 1,300 miles, with optimized mixture control and auxiliary internal tankage, 1,650 miles. Von Ohain stared at the numbers. No response came. The irony burned deeper than anyone spoke aloud. The Merlin engine's roots traced back to German engineering, Daimler-Benz principles refined by Rolls-Royce, then mass-produced by Packard in Detroit. German technology, perfected abroad, now dominated German skies. An aide entered with a translated interrogation report from a captured American pilot. "We call it the Cadillac of the sky. Smooth, fast, and it'll take you anywhere." Von Ohain set the report down without comment. Outside, wind rattled the hangar doors. The sound resembled distant applause, for engineers who had calculated too narrowly, who had assumed limitations rather than adaptation. Ritter's final note in his engineering log, dated March 6, 1944, read, "The Americans did not overcome range limitations. They simply refused to accept them. By the time we understood their solution, it was already over Berlin." The log entry ended there. By April, Rechlin's focus shifted from analysis to survival. Allied air superiority was no longer theoretical. It was measured in escort fighters over every target, in bomber formations, flying with impunity, in Luftwaffe pilots who climbed knowing American Mustangs waited above the clouds. The laugh that had echoed through the conference room in January 1943, mocking the P-51's thirst, dismissing its potential, had died. In its place was silence, broken only by the distant hum of Merlin engines crossing the Reich. Over the North Sea on March 4, 1944, at 1840 hours, Jenkins' fuel gauge touched red. "Red 1 to control, bingo fuel," he called. His voice cracked from 8 hours of oxygen mask pressure. The return flight was endless grey ocean, whitecaps stretching to the horizon. The cockpit reeked of exhaust and sweat. His right hand cramped from gripping the throttle. Back ached. Ears rang from engine noise. At 1855 hours, the white cliffs of Dover appeared through haze. Relief flooded through him. He descended to 5,000 feet, then 2,000 feet, lining up with Debden's runway. The Merlin coughed once. The fuel gauge read 8 gallons. He touched down at 1903 hours, rolled to the taxiway, and shut down the engine. Silence. Ground crew sprinted to the aircraft. Delano climbed onto the wing, checked the fuel sight glass, and ran his hand along the drop tank pylons. Bone dry. She made it on fumes. Jenkins pulled off his helmet, hair matted with sweat. He climbed out slowly, legs stiff, and stood on the wing. The sunset painted the sky orange and purple. Around him, other Mustangs landed, one after another, silver shapes settling onto the runway like migratory birds completing an impossible journey. Delano held up the fuel logbook. 14 gallons remaining. You flew Wadtow 281 miles. Jenkins nodded. And we're going back tomorrow. The logbook entry that night, written in pencil by the operations officer, was factual and brief. Mission 241 to Berlin, 238 bombers escorted, 55 fighters dispatched, 52 returned, escort range confirmed, full penetration possible. That single line rewrote strategic doctrine. The P-51 wasn't just a fighter. It was proof that persistence and engineering could compress distance, rewrite assumptions, and turn the impossible into routine operations. By April 1944, bomber loss rates over Germany dropped by 62% compared to February. In May, the drop reached 75%. 8th Air Force operational reports attributed the decline to continuous fighter escort across all mission phases. P-51 Mustangs now flew over every major German city: Munich, Stuttgart, Frankfurt, Leipzig, Berlin. At Duxford Airfield, pilots painted kill marks beneath their canopies. Jenkins added his 11th on May 8, 1944. "Not bad for a thirsty engine," he said. By mid-1944, the P-51 had achieved an 11-to-1 kill ratio against Luftwaffe fighters. Production at North American Aviation's Inglewood plant reached 15 aircraft per day. Packard's Merlin engine output exceeded 400 units monthly. The numbers told the story. In January 1944, the Luftwaffe fielded 1,650 single-engine fighters. By July, that number had dropped to 980 operational aircraft, despite increased production. Attrition exceeded replacement. Fuel shortages grounded squadrons. Pilot training collapsed. Ritter's final intelligence report to Berlin, dated June 15, 1944, was blunt. Enemy escort fighters possess effectively unlimited operational range. German interceptor operations are unsustainable under current conditions. Fuel reserves depleting faster than resupply. Pilot experience declining due to accelerated training cycles. Recommendation: withdraw fighter reserves to protect critical infrastructure only. The report was filed without response. By July, German fighter fields lay in ruin: cratered runways, burned hangars, destroyed aircraft. Allied air superiority was absolute. In the archives decades later, historians found Ritter's last note, written in the margin of a fuel consumption chart. "We calculated their limits. They calculated how to exceed them. The difference decided the war." That note, pencil on yellowed paper, captured the engineering reality. The P-51 Mustang hadn't just extended escort range, it had shattered the strategic assumptions underpinning Luftwaffe defensive doctrine. Numbers, persistence, and a hybrid engine born of three nations, German design, British refinement, American production, had rewritten air warfare. At Freeman Field, Indiana, in August 1945, Jenkins stood beside his P-51D, the upgraded variant with bubble canopy and 6 guns. The paint was chipped. Exhaust streaks burned into the cowling. Oil stains darkened the belly. The war was over. Delano approached, holding a small placard, a quote from the January 1943 German intelligence assessment. "The P-51 Mustang's range limitations render it unsuitable for deep strategic operations." Jenkins laughed softly. "Guess they were right, until we weren't." The Merlin coughed once more before shutdown, its echo fading across the field like a heartbeat slowing to rest. Around them, rows of silver Mustangs sat parked, veterans of a war won by production, endurance, and engineering. Delano traced his hand along the drop tank pylon. Paper tanks, hybrid engine, and pilots who flew 8 hours in freezing cold. That's what beat them. Jenkins nodded. That, and refusing to believe what everyone said, was impossible. The logbook in Jenkins' hand recorded 84 combat missions, 1,247 hours in P-51's, and 13 confirmed kills. Unremarkable by some standards, but every mission had contributed to a larger shift. Bomber crews who reached targets and returned home, factories destroyed, supply lines severed, air superiority established. The strategic impact couldn't be measured in individual kills. It was measured in the cumulative weight of escort missions flown daily, in German pilots who stopped climbing, in production facilities that burned without defense. In archives decades later, researchers found one note from Klaus Ritter, the German analyst, who first identified the Mustang's true range. It was written on the back of a fuel report dated March 1944. "We mocked their thirst, we forgot that thirst can drive men and machines further than fear ever could. The P-51 Mustang, born of doubt and defiance, flew not just to Berlin and back. It flew into history, carried by Merlin engines, paper tanks, and pilots who refused to turn back.